Waiting for Aaron Long to show up.
Hey, Donald.
Hey, it took me a while there. It got a little wonky on me, but here I am.
I'm sorry, I was in my office getting the bulletin ready for Sunday whenever you messaged me, or I'd have been on sooner. I'm glad you did because I wasn't paying attention to the clock.
Oh, okay. I'm about done with Amy Bird.
I've been done with her.
Yeah. Well, it was like when we did this section on Masons for a while,
Hmm.
and I did my research up and down, and then I did quite a bit actually.
Hmm.
And then I'm done with them too. I'll never go near them. And Amy Bird's just a busybody without a meek and gentle spirit. She needs to make noise.
Well, ultimately, my thing with her is not her exactly. My problem with her, and it's why I wanted you to talk about Machen, is she is something that should never have been able to happen. But because of institutional rot, and that's just the word I'm going to use for it, they have blinded themselves. And as I say they here, I'm talking about most denominational structures, have blinded themselves by their own either arrogance or stupidity or whatever to wolves that are creeping around the outside trying to get in.
Well, I'd like to finish Machen today, but also tack onto it a quick review of the Auburn Affirmation in 1924-ish, which
Mm-hmm.
goes exactly to your point, fully and completely, and how institutional rot, if it's not checked and torn up and rooted out and thrown out, it stays and corrupts, and it corrupted the PCUSA.
And Donald, I don't want you to think that I was wanting you to make Amy Bird the enemy. I've honestly never seen her as she is an enemy. She is not the enemy, if that makes any sense. She is a manifestation of the wolves. But the thing is what I'm scared of is that some of them open their eyes to her, but they didn't open their eyes to the problem that allowed her, if that makes any sense.
I hear you. Yep. Well, can we pick back up and finish Machen and jump
I
over to
would
Auburn?
be happy to. I love to listen to your wisdom on Machen.
Let's see, where is it at? Give me a second here to.
I will say, I really wish Machen would have taken the four on the fundamentalist. And if he would have, maybe we would not have the predominance of dispensationalism that we do.
Yeah,
Maybe he could have strangled that baby in the cradle.
yeah. Just a quick, fast review where we went last time. 1881. Dad's Episcopalian, mother's Presbyterian. He learns the catechism by 12, goes to school, John Hopkins, gets a master's degree, decides to go to seminary 1902, but he's affected by this German Lutheran and becomes liberal for 2, 3 years, which kind of is a major turning point. Um, he goes over uh, to serve with the YMCA during World War I. He's back at Princeton. Now, this is very important years when we're going to switch over later to the Auburn Affirmation. Now, he lived through that. Um, B.B. Warfield did not. B.B. Warfield saw the rot in the structure of the PCUSA. We talked about Westminster Seminary, Orthodox Presbyterian. Here's where we left off. We don't have
Can,
much more to do on him.
can I make an observation?
Yeah,
Going to what you're saying about that time period, what that time period was the ultimate consummation of the shift of new, it had been coming for 100 years, but it was the consummation of American Puritanism transforming into what has become today political wokeism. Because if you study, and it's relevant to what we're talking about, and Machen and Warfield, I think, saw it, even though they wouldn't be able to put the same words to it. Because Machen refers to the ideas that I'm expressing in Christianity and liberalism. What he doesn't seem to necessarily pick up on is the fact that modern progressivism is the degenerated child of American Puritanism. It has all the traits that I would probably say are the worst traits of Puritanism, and none of the good. It has the social shaming. It has the purity cycles. It has all of these different elements that led to the Salem witch trials and all the rest of it, without having the strong backbone of the Reformed faith. And it starts with the First Great Awakening, moves into the second, the missionary alliance between the Presbyterians and the Congregationalists, the Unitarian takeover of Harvard. But in this time period, as they start to drink deeply from the wells of higher criticism, that's when you start to see the shift. It took over Congregationalism first because in congregational polity, there is no accountability. Since there is no accountability, even though it takes longer because you have to take over each individual congregation, once the congregation is taken, there's almost no way to take it back. And Machen is ultimately fighting that, or at least that's my take on it. And it was a war that was eventually lost, and we see it in our modern political situation.
Yeah, well, we can skip this religion and politics. I think, unless you want me to do it, we're right near the end. What's your pleasure?
Well, the religion and politics comes down to, I think, an understanding that Machen had of Christianity being an element of the culture. And I call it, you hear it today bandied about as two kingdoms. I call it two swords. There are two swords that God gave the world: the sword of the government and the sword of the church. The church's sword is church discipline. And ultimately, I think Machen, from my reading of him, that was his take on it. If a politician got out of control, it was the church's duty to discipline that politician. And that ethics and morals have to be conformed to the Bible. But it is not the place of the church to do the governing. It is the place of the church to govern the governors.
Well, let's go ahead and read this, see what he was. A radical libertarian, I'm told. Machen was suspicious of mixing religion and politics. He found attempts to establish a Christian culture by political means insensitive to minorities. He was even concerned about the corrupting influence of politics on Christianity and saw the social gospel as a terrible warning. He opposed school prayer and Bible reading in public school. By the way, in Canada, both of my parents would read a chapter of the Bible. They would do the Lord's Prayer, and they would take a collect from the prayer book, and that was public school, everybody. This position, however, then they would sing "God Save the King." or they're very Canadian, very British in background. Historian George Marsden described Machen as radically libertarian. He opposed almost any extension of state power and took stands on a variety of issues. Like most libertarians, his stances violated usual categories of liberal and conservative. He opposed the establishment of the Federal Department of Education.
Which he should have.
Yep, suggesting before a joint congressional committee that government control of the children was the ultimate sacrifice of freedom. He was also opposed to the child labor amendment proposed in 1924. He was not against locally operated public schools per se, but feared the influence of materialistic ideology and opposition to higher human aspirations. He also opposed prohibition, a costly stance in an age when abstinence was almost a creed among Protestants. By the way, he was known on Sunday afternoons to have students into the oratorium there in Alexander Hall. It's a great big room on the second floor where they would students would do practice sermons, but he would have them up in there and they'd drink whiskey and smoke cigars and talk theology. Uh, I don't know what they did by Sunday night. Maybe they went to drunk church.
When you're drunk.
He was opposed to a foreign policy of imperialism and materialism. Now we come down to his death. Much to the sadness of those who had been involved in the movement that he led, Machen died on January 1937 at age 55. Some commentators, notably Ned Stonehouse, point out that Machen's constitution was not always strong, and he was constantly burdened with the responsibilities of his time. Machen had decided to honor some speaking engagements in North Dakota in 1936, but developed pleurisy in the exceptionally cold weather there. After Christmas, he was hospitalized for pneumonia and died on January 1, 1937. Just before his death, he dictated a telegram to a long-term friend and colleague, John Murray. I might add that John Murray is my theological grandfather via Westminster, the content of which reflected deeply his lifelong faith. This is a very famous telegram. I'm so thankful for the active obedience of Christ. No hope without it. He's buried in Greenmount Cemetery in Baltimore. The stone covering his grave, very simply his name, degree, dates, and the phrase "faithful unto death" in Greek, and that's it there. His mother and father are up in there, and his grandfather and grandparents are over to the right of this picture. I always stop in there when I go through Baltimore, and I stopped my first time in there. The archivist or the guy at the front office told me that a lot of times scholars came in looking for his grave. He also told me that he had money because they built this down into the ground bricks. So he's in a brick container in which they put the grave. Baltimore journalist H.L. Mencken wrote an editorial on Machen in December 1931 and later contributed an obituary entitled Dr. Fundamentalist that was published in the Baltimore Evening Sun, January 18, 1937. While disagreeing with Machen's theology, Mencken nevertheless articulated a great respect for his intellectual ability. He noted that Machen fell out with the reformers who had been trying in recent years to convert the Presbyterian Church into a kind of literary and social club devoted vaguely to good works, and that he lost in the end and was forced out of Princeton, it might be manifest that he marched off to Philadelphia with all the honors of war. Machen also compared Machen to William Jennings Bryan, a well-known Baptist and conservative leader, with the statement, Dr. Machen was to Bryan as the Matterhorn is to a wart. Machen left his considerable estate to the Westminster Seminary in Philadelphia, giving $10,000 outright to the seminary. It might be added that, forget the guy's name now. It's coming back to me, Old Testament, Oswald Alice. He too was from money. And he had a house downtown, down in Center City, Philadelphia, that they used at first for seminary classes. And also the Reformed Episcopal Seminary helped the young Westminster Seminary get started. But back then, and Reformed Episcopal Seminary was out at 42nd, 43rd Street, so they were out a ways west of Center City. But where Westminster was just maybe 8 or 10 blocks from Donald Barnhouse was at 10th Presbyterian at the time. Dr. Machen provided that half of the balance, after certain bequests to his brothers and others were cared for, should be placed in the hands of 5 trustees to be held for the benefit of Westminster Seminary. 10% of the residuary estate was to go to the independent board. The will was drawn in 1935 before establishing that of the Presbyterian Guardian and before the organization of the church. The gross estimate was $175,000. He's the reason why there's a Reformed camp. I'm going now back to find out where the Auburn statement is at. It's in here somewhere. Give me a second here. Auburn Affirmation. You can see.
Just passed it.
I did?
Go down. No, you got to go back up. Sorry, I was going the wrong direction. Oh, excuse me. I was reading Arthur. I thought it said Auburn. That's my problem. My fault.
Well, the Auburn Affirmation goes right back to, there it is. That goes right back to what you talked about, institutional rot. Maybe you want to pick it up here and read it yourself.
Yes. The Auburn Affirmation is a document dated May 1924 with the title, An Affirmation Designed to Safeguard the Unity and Liberty of the Presbyterian Church in the United States of America. Authored by an 11-member conference committee and signed by 1,274 ministers of the PCUSA. The affirmation challenged the right of the highest body of the church, the General Assembly, to impose the 5 fundamentals as a test of orthodoxy without the concurrence of a vote from the regional bodies, the presbyteries.
Remember when I told you to watch the years 1918 to 26?
Yep.
This lands right there, 5 years before he leaves Princeton. And notice this number.
1,274 ministers.
That is huge. And this shows that the rot was there. And B.B. Warfield noted it in 1903, 1904. He said the termites are already in the beams of the church. Now you can tell here again, you want to go on.
In 1910, 1916, and again in 1923, the General Assembly declared that every candidate seeking to be ordained in the Presbyterian Church ought to be able to affirm, and I would say on these five, anybody who is an honest Christian ought to be able to affirm this: the inerrancy of the scriptures, the virgin birth and deity of Jesus, the doctrine of substitutionary atonement, the bodily resurrection of Christ, and the authenticity of Christ's miracles.
I think
These should never even be questioned. It shouldn't have had to have come up.
notice that they are trying again and again and again, three different times. And then a year later, these 1,274 ministers say, no, no, no. The rot was wide and deep. And these five fundamentals were like a litmus test, like triage. And if they didn't hold it, they should not be in the PCUSA.
Now, my thing is, and I want to ask this question, had the PCUSA already given up subscription to the Westminster Standards at this point?
That's exactly where this goes.
Because ultimately, if you are subscribed to the Westminster Standards, actually, if you're subscribed to any of the reformational confessions, I'll make a broad statement. You have to affirm these 5 points.
Yeah.
And that would be Lutheran, Anglican, Reformed, Presbyterian, all of them affirm these 5 points.
I would even say that the Council of Trent most strongly affirms these 5 points.
Oh, yeah, and it does. You're absolutely right. And so what you've got is the rot has already set in.
Big time. Big time.
The Auburn Theological Seminary history professor, Robert Hastings Nichols, proposed to challenge this procedure of repeatedly affirming additional standards of orthodoxy besides the Bible and the Westminster Confession of Faith, which the Westminster affirms all of those, which were the only standards of orthodoxy officially recognized by the church. The affirmation denounces that the procedure of affirming the fundamentals in the General Assembly is a contradiction to the history and the polity of the Presbyterian Church. It's a shell game, Donald, because if you affirm the Westminster, you affirm those 5 things. So what he is saying is he actually rejects both the Bible and the Westminster Confession of Faith by rejecting the fundamentals.
Yes.
So why was he not brought up on trial for that?
Great, great question.
Hence, I go back to...
And this will become part of Machen's departure in 1929 when they mix up the board of directors and they bring on 2 trustees who signed this Auburn Affirmation. And it was because of Charles Erdman of the Erdman Publishing Company.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were admitting liberals onto the trustee board.
It was drafted and signed by a writing group, primarily Nicholas and Henry Sloan Coffin, with the original intention of presenting it to the General Assembly in 1923. After events of the Assembly that year appeared to indicate that their thesis would be favorably received by moderates, Coffin suggested that the affirmation should be signed by ministers before being formally made public. And in accord with that advice, it was circulated for signature in preparation for the General Assembly of 1924.
Again, 1,274 ministers signed this in that year.
All right, the affirmation. Although the affirmation did not officially come from Auburn Theological Seminary, at that time located in Auburn, New York, the name Auburn Affirmation has been attached to the document from the beginning because of Nicholas's influence as the originator of the idea. The Auburn Affirmation was the culmination of the fundamentalist modernist controversy, which by 1924 had been a conflict of more than 30 years within the Presbyterian Church USA.
There you go. They had many signals and signs and indications of the growing decadence.
All right. It is generally regarded as signaling a turning point in the history of American Presbyterianism because it garnered the support of both theological traditionalists and liberals. Now, my thing is ultimately whatever these traditionalists claim that they are,
Yep.
they're not actually traditionalists.
Yep.
Besides,
thereby looking at the rot that you talked about,
Mhm.
the OPC and Amy Bird.
Besides the 1,274 signatories, the document as submitted claimed the support of hundreds of ministers who agree with and approve the affirmation, though they have refrained from signing it. Now, my thing on that is what I tell them in the church all the time. I do not accept complaints or anything from people who do not have the testicular fortitude to put their name and face to it. If you are too cowardly to actually be able to express your opinion and attach your face and name to it, I have no obligation to listen to anything you say.
Wait till we get down to what the affirmation said.
Oh no, I see already number 6 makes me want to vomit in my mouth right now. The affirmation has 6 sections that can be summarized as number 1, the Westminster Confession of Faith is not inerrant, which the confession itself says anyway.
Yeah.
The supreme guide of scripture interpretation is the Spirit of God to the individual believer and not ecclesiastical authority, which the confession on some degree says. Thus, liberty of conscience is elevated over the Westminster Confession of Faith. Now, when they're using the term liberty of conscience, what they're doing is the same thing the Roman Catholics did at Vatican II. If you read the Vatican II documents, they're not as bad as what you saw come out afterward, because what they rallied around was the spirit of Vatican II, not the documents. Ultimately, progressives always will push one set of documents that are acceptable to traditionalists, all the while undermining it with the spirit thereof. Number 2, the General Assembly has no power to dictate doctrine to the presbyteries. That's a load of horse crap.
Yeah, it is.
If they would have gone back and read the former Presbyterial church government in the Westminster Standards, yes, it does. They're rewriting Presbyterian history.
Yep.
Number 3, the General Assembly's condemnation of those asserting doctrines contrary to the standards of the Presbyterian Church circumvented the due process set forth in the Book of Discipline, thereby elevating the Book of Discipline above the standards and above the Bible. Number 4, none of the 5 essential doctrines should be used as a test of ordination. Alternate theories of these doctrines are permissible. No, they're not. If you reject those 5 things, you're lying when you claim to be a Christian.
Yeah. This is why I wanted to tag this on to Machen.
Number 5, liberty of thought and teaching within the bounds of evangelical Christianity is necessary. None of the reformers would have agreed with that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why did they write the confessions and catechisms to start with?
Yeah.
Number 6, division is deplored. Unity and freedom are commended. All right. It's like they don't even read the Bible. Jesus says himself with his words, I did not come to bring peace. I came to bring the sword, setting father against son and mother against daughter and mother-in-law against daughter-in-law.
The creeds are meant to divide.
Right,
Meanwhile, they're meant to unify the subscribers.
right.
So it's outright rejection when you look. I mean, these are really basic things.
Right. There's something that they're all embedded on a level in our creedal statements from the early church.
And I would say they have to keep trying to do this 3 separate times, like they already see the rot and the termites in the beams of the church.
Right. Referring to the 5 fundamentals as particular theories. Did they not study theology, philosophy, or church history?
Well, this goes maybe to your point about the second great awakening and the new lights and the old lights, that out in the West, there was a school in Cincinnati, um, Ohio, forget the name of it. It was Presbyterian. And then McCormick in Chicago that had more of the new light type tendencies and that shift towards a subjectivism that you talk about a lot.
Well, it's because nobody realizes how poisonous subjectivism is. There has to, okay, on a different situation, in Prayer Book Anglican, and we're not going to get into about Hugh. I got into this morning with one of the members that was criticizing Peter for condemning Haberlin's decision. And he said, who was Peter to dictate that the formularies defined Anglicanism? And I responded back, the objective truth of the statement is that the formularies themselves, by necessity, define what Anglicanism is. They are objective statements set forth at the beginning. The St. Louis Confession does not define Anglicanism. Anglicanism was already defined. Presbyterianism was defined at Westminster. What arrogance is evident in these people thinking that they can redefine what has already been defined? If you go back to the roots of the Reformation, ultimately, whether it be Luther or Calvin, whether it be Melanchthon or Zwingli or Bullinger or Butzer or even Erasmus himself, always went back to ad fontes to defend their arguments. It was never, I feel this way. It was, here is what the Bible says. Here are what the early church fathers say. Here are what the councils say. They are forever going back to the source. You cannot change things just because you feel like it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I
No.
get so fed up with this.
Well, this is why I wanted you to get in on the Auburn Affirmation and the shift towards subjectivism, because it'll only get worse.
Right. Some of us regard the particular theories, being historic Christianity, contained in the deliverance of the General Assembly of 1923 as satisfactory explanations of these facts and doctrines. But we are united in believing that these are not the only theories allowed by Scripture and our standards as explanations of these facts and doctrines of our religion, and that all who hold to these facts and doctrines, whatever theories they may employ to explain them, are all worthy of confidence and fellowship.
I might add,
Absolutely not.
this was up in Canada as well. And my grandparents, the Veitches, were Presbyterians. And then in 1925, they united with the Methodists of all things and became known as the United Presbyterian Church. But one minister in 1925 was a minister. My grandparents' church denied the virgin birth of Jesus, saying it wasn't necessary. So my grandparents shifted to another Presbyterian church, which was conservative, and who the minister, Dr. Smith, who held to the confession. But this is, like we said at the beginning, this was a major turning point in Presbyterian history.
Partly due to the acceptance of the Auburn Affirmation, Presbyterian traditionalists who found themselves displaced because of it went on to found the Orthodox Presbyterian Church. This church maintains the older standards, such as belief in the 5 doctrines listed above. Discussion of the Affirmation continued into the 1940s when the Presbyterian Church in the U.S., aka the Southern Presbyterian Church, began to consider the union with the Northern Presbyterian Church in the USA, with conservatives charging that the Affirmation was indicative of the theological posture of the Northern denomination, which is why the PCA exists.
Right. That was a Southern movement. Well, that's it. J. Gresham Machen and the Auburn Affirmation. And because of Machen, we have 2 Westminster seminaries, not perfect, and we have 5 or 6 Reformed theological seminaries, which is, when you put them all together with the URC and other NAPARC members, you have about 700,000 to 800,000 alleged Reformed confessional churches. I'm not sure, when I was a kid in the 60s, the PCUSA had about 6 million. The Methodists had about 13 or 14 million. They're down to about 6 or 7 million now. And the Presbyterians are down to about 1 million or 1.5 million. So they're dying. I mean, anyways, loss of confessional status.
But Donald, what we're seeing in all of this, it's funny you brought the Masons up, because there is a Masonic influence in the new lights that is not present in the old lights, that ultimately builds off the Masonic doctrine of the universal fatherhood of God and the universal brotherhood of man.
Yeah.
Which is what they're talking about when they talk about in essentials unity, in differences charity, and in all things liberty. Ultimately, what you have is this concept that you don't have to hold to an objective truth to unify.
Which is a confessional statement.
Right, but it is a rejection
And a divisive statement.
And a rejection of historical Christianity.
Yeah.
And a rejection of biblical Christianity.
Yeah.
And what you will see is ultimately these things forever seem to be attempting to infiltrate and destroy the church. What I would like to talk about on Friday, with your permission, because this is actually, and you were one of the wisest men I know, Donald. This was an excellent place to stop at today. because what you are seeing today is ultimately a continuation of the same thing. Why would anybody, after the writing of the Yellow Wallpaper, defend Amy Bird in any way, shape, or form? Why is it Michael Horton is still accorded the degree of respect and honor that he is given within the URCNA when he basically has abandoned any concept of the historical doctrine of the church within the world in favor of defeatism and retreatism? I can go through a couple of other examples, but the problem is the same issues are occurring today as occurred then. And where it stems from is two different places. One of which is the leadership of the church, whatever denomination it is, and the seminary staff of the church, whatever church it is, are drawing from people who have never been forced to pastor local congregations. They are elitists who ultimately live in a false world. They live in their ivory tower. And the secondary problem is the desire to be seen as respectable within the modern culture.
John Murray, whom we quoted earlier, told Bishop Theophilus Herder, this would be back in the 1960s when he got his doctorate under Murray. He was concerned that the OPC was losing its grasp on the necessity of preaching the gospel and missionary work, and that the professors at the seminary were interested more and more in being theological elitists or theologically driven. And that concerned him, and Bishop Herder told that to my ears.
But to end the conversation on Amy Bird, other than reference, the reason why she was not outright disciplined after the writing of the Yellow Wallpaper, and the reason why Spangler and the Southeastern Presbytery were gone after so hard, is because the OPC was more scared of being called misogynistic and condemned by the secular culture than they were of destroying heresy and error when they crept into the church. Now, they had their hand forced eventually. They did eventually start to do what was right, but the rot is being seen in the fact that they would automatically bend the knee to egalitarianism, which their confessional statements deny, just so they could be seen as being contemporarily relative.
I really have not dug into the micro details of the Southeast Presbyterian General Assembly. She apparently attended the General Assembly that dealt with it. And as she relates the story, she was handled rather rudely and referred to as that lady over there.
Mm-hmm.
He makes a big deal of that. And that was 3 hours of rumbling and rambling, and she felt, and her husband said when they left, he says, well, I guess the only thing left is OPC prison. So,
but she was in the wrong. And I'm sorry, yes, I go back to which is more important, a heretic's feelings or the truth?
yeah, she's very surreptitious. She'll ask 100 questions, all based on her feelings, and then she'll slip something in. She's not direct. Her book, Recovering from Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, you don't know what she's recovering from when you're done reading it, except seeing a bunch of bunny rabbit trails.
But have you finished reading Rules for Radicals yet?
Not yet. It's over here.
That is a tactic. That is a feature, not a bug. But that is actually a different conversation.
Yeah.
That is the how, not what that is not identifying the problem. That is how do the wolves get into the sheep pen?
Yeah.
And I don't mean to be silly about it, but they're really, while they go hand in hand, it is my opinion we need to identify what the problem is before we start to address the tactics the enemy is using.
Yeah. Know the enemy. Know who they are.
Right. All right. Well, I'm going to let you go, Donald. We'll get back together on Friday and we'll finish this part out.
Okay, sounds good. I'll see you Friday. Godspeed.
All right. Bye.
All right.